this is Stephanie Washer, and we're going to go through 2.3 Change Management. It is the final section of Module 2 from the Networking Essentials or Net Plus Guide to Networks for the RBC PCT 110 course called Network Essentials. So this little final section is Change Management. We're going to go through, again, talking about documentation and policies, and then there'll be a scenario that we'll go through talking about network hardening techniques. But change management is something that is very important. I'm in grad school right now, which you've heard plenty of, but my point is there's a whole couple classes on change management. People do not like change. Change is something that is inevitable, especially in the world of IT, but people don't like to change. So I remember back when we switched from one word processor to a Word, and that was an uproar. That was like 20 years ago. It was just insane. The people did not want to change. So it's very, very hard. And it's something that it's definitely something that people have the knack. When you have the knack for change management and to do new implementations of software without many issues, that is a skill in itself. So any kind of software or hardware change, those are things that you want to make sure you document. And not only do you have to worry about installation, any kind of patching, any upgrades, any rollbacks, if there's anything that you need for training for people, you have to think about that as well. So we're going to think about this on the IT side. So we're going to think about it in that we need to install new hardware. Maybe we have a new customer relationship software, sales software, Salesforce, everyone uses it in some aspect or another. And so, or maybe an accounting software package or just anything that you use. I was just recently using Camtasia and it locked up on me. But anyway, any software package that people need to do their job. The other definition is patch. And so like on our operating systems, like our Windows operating system, the patch is a correction or improvement in that software. So it's just a little enhancement or maybe even a security code that needs to be added to close a vulnerability. That is patch management. So we download the patch and then we have to do what is called patch management and figure out if we want to install it right away. But most of the time in a network environment, in a business environment, you're going to test it and then you'll implement and install it. So you're going to use what's called patch management. Upgrading, any kind of upgrade. So right now we have a bunch of computers in my labs in WTC 2100 and 2620. We have Windows 10 machines, so we have to think about possibly an upgrade to Windows 11. The other thing is we could upgrade to Windows 11 and then hate it and then have to revert back or roll back to Windows 10. And you can do that for patches as well as upgrades. There is such a thing as called Patch Tuesday. So Windows is known to release patches on Tuesday. And one of the questions I was in for interviewing. So I was helping the IT department at Rock Valley in their hiring, and one of the questions we asked was a scenario question, and the problem happened to be in the afternoon on Tuesday. And part of their answer was they wanted to know if people understood what Patch Tuesday was and if that was an actual thing, and it is. Microsoft, I'm telling you. If you just let those patches go through, sometimes they work, sometimes you want to test them. Not all the time you want to test them, but sometimes they fail. And then hardware issues, you can just replace different things. So like if something goes down, obviously you want to go replace it. You can't just test it. And so hardware changes could be anything. Maybe you put in new security cameras, maybe in new printers, maybe some VoIP hardware. Maybe you need some firmware updates. There might be different things that you have to do. And firmware updates are for hardware devices. So, you have to flash the device so that you can get the good firmware on there. And so here's just here's steps for changing software, hardware. You don't want anything to be automatically installed when you have a network environment, especially on like servers. You want to test that out first. So you turn off automatically installed patches, updates, then you'll determine whether that patch or upgrade is necessary. So patches generally plug security holes, so you definitely want to get those in right away, but you want to test them for functionality before releasing them to your whole network. Then the other thing that you want to do is look at the vendor documentation regarding all of that you're going to uninstall. So depending on whether it's a patch or upgrade, you'll look at all of the documentation provided to make sure that it's compatible with everything. And then before deploying anything, again, test. And so you'll have a small lab environment. Most likely it's a virtual environment that you can test things in, and it will be a nice harmless environment that you can see if there's any issues, and you can document your finding. And then if it works fine, then you will determine whether you can just deploy it to all computers, whether you're going to do distribute it centrally, or if you want to touch each machine. So if it's just so like SolidWorks is one of our, what we use in engineering, or what they use in engineering, and it's only a couple labs. So in those couple of labs, they might just do it lab by lab or machine by machine, depending on what the software change would be. And then you always want to do any type of changes or completion of or install of the patch or upgrade outside of work hours. Inform anybody that's affected, let them know what's going on, and then back up the current system. Prevent any users from changing anything before you do the patch or upgrade, and then keep any installation instructions or documentation handy while you're doing the change. And after the change is implemented, you're going to test it out. And the next morning, if you do it like Sunday night or a night during the week, the next morning you'll know real quick if your change failed, because people will contact you if they can't do what they're supposed to do. If the change is successful, then you'll just let everybody be able to get to the system. If it's not successful, you can just roll everything back. And I say just roll everything back. It's not always that easy, but you got to have a rollback plan and roll things back if it's not working. And then you'll let everybody know, including affected users, help desk, system admins, when the change is complete, and if you had to do any kind of changes or reversals, and then record anything. So document. And so, sometimes not everything goes smoothly, so you just have to have a backup plan when that happens. And it always feels so terrible when it happens. You just get the worst feeling in your stomach. And then, there's a couple times I've done some upgrades and patches, and it just gives you a stomach ache when you get an error or something happens. So you just always want to try and give yourself a plan of action if anything fails. So here's kind of reversing. So if you have a system patch, you could just uninstall that patch. If it's a software upgrade for client software, you could probably uninstall and reinstall that previous version. If it's a shared application upgrade, you can use the uninstall utility for that. Operating system, that's going to be a little bit harder, but if you made a complete backup of the system, you can just roll it back. And if you actually make a complete backup of the system, it's easier to restore from the backup. So that one I have done before, and like in Windows, there's a restore point that you can create. I do the restore point and the backup, so I do a couple of different things because sometimes those restore points don't always work like they should. So just a little caveat. So you just always want to have multiple backups. Anytime you replace a hard drive, you just want to keep the old component for a while. I do this all the time, and then later, I've had things where like 5 years later, this happens in the back of 2100. I have all this stuff that I've been keeping, and I'm like, what is this hard drive to? And then I have to plug it in and go, oh yeah, I was keeping this because I was waiting to see if I needed it, and then I ended up not needing it. So, which is always good. And then change management, you just always want to make sure you go process all of the changes through the proper channels, minimize any negative effects on the business, and then minimize any chances of, so you want to make sure you're successful on the first attempt. You want to plan it so that you can make sure everything is, and so minimize any problems, kind of think through that process and document the change, of course, document. I feel like document should be all over these pages. Change management, if there's anything, so like at a larger organization, you have quite a bit of documentation that you need to do when you do any kind of hardware, software changes. And it just protects everybody so that you don't disrupt any kind of productivity on any area or any one person. So what happens is you would want to submit a change request document and find out who is responsible for leading the charge. So if you want a new accounting application, you got to figure out who's in charge and who you can submit a change request to, how the request process goes. And so IT personnel, they like to be able to have everything centralized because it just makes it easier for them to work. And so you just want to ensure that you're going to the right person. And then here's just kind of parts of the request, obviously the type of change, the reason for the change, the person who is submitting this, configuration, potential fallback or potential impacts, grounds for rollback. So what happens if we need to roll back, the notification process, the timeline for the change. So like downtime and how long it will take to install. I think that should be part of it too. I would probably put downtime is 2 hours. Like, the time to install, you might have to add that in there. And then just look and follow that approval process. You want to make sure that you follow everything you should be following, any project management procedures. So you might have to work with a project manager or the IT manager or whoever in the IT department would go through this process with you, and they would authorize any downtime or any changes. But the project manager will also help get that, kind of oversee and make sure everything's going smoothly, along with including user training and on things, because when new software comes around, user training is huge. Although if you don't have training for your users and they don't know how to use it, they won't keep using it. Perfect example is I was using Camtasia, and I'm not a super user on Camtasia, and I don't have patience to work through things with that program because I've used other programs that have been super easy, and it messed up on me today, and now I'm like, I don't want to use it. That's how I feel. I mean, I will go back and I'll try it again, but right now I'm going to use whatever's easiest so that I can get my work done in a timely manner. So you just have to make things easy and have to have training so that people can use the software properly. Provide additional documentation. So all the documentation you want to make sure you have. You want any step-by-step procedures, any kind of testing that you've done, any vendor information. There might be documentation or contact information, any backups on where they're located, and you should have your network configuration, IP addressing, any additions to the network, any physical locations, all a part of that additional documentation. So if there's any changes that you need throughout the change management process, you have to provide thorough documentation for. And then at the end, you can, when the change is completed, everything's tested, everything works well, you're done and you can officially close that change. And then it would go over to training where you just people would probably have more issues with how am I going to use the software versus it's not working. So you've got the two different areas, the how do I use the software versus getting it installed and updated. So that is everything for chapter 2. So we finished up with the change management portion, and we are all about module 2 this time around, which is, we talked about the components of structural cabling, we talked about network documentation, and then finally this one, change management.